Please like, share, and subscribe. Wishing you happiness and good luck every day.
Welcome to The Explainer. What if I told you that the way most of us chase success is just fundamentally wrong? That by focusing on winning, you might actually be setting yourself up to lose in the long run? Well, today we're diving into a really powerful idea from Simon Sinek that completely reframes the game of business, of careers, and even life itself. It's all about the massive difference between playing to win and playing just to keep playing. So let's kick things off with a little riddle from history that just perfectly sets the stage. It's a story about a war where one side won almost every single battle, but still ended up losing the war. I mean, how does that even happen? This was the baffling reality for the United States during the Vietnam War. You had this military superpower with all the technology, all the force. You'd think they were just destined for a quick and decisive victory. But what actually happened defied all the conventional logic. The real question is, why? And if you just look at the traditional metrics of war, the numbers on this slide are absolutely staggering. The US lost 58,000 service members. Compare that to North Vietnam, who suffered an estimated 3 million casualties, military and civilian. By any standard measure, like battles won or casualties inflicted, the American forces were just overwhelmingly dominant. And yet, they didn't win. See, the problem wasn't a failure of military tactics. It was a complete misunderstanding of the game they were playing. The United States was fighting to win a war, to get to a finish line. But for North Vietnam, the objective was totally different. It was to survive and just outlast their opponent, fighting for their independence no matter what it took. One side was playing to finish the game, the other was just playing to stay in it. And that story right there is the perfect setup for the core idea from Simon Sinek, which he actually adapted from the philosopher James P. Carse. The idea is that there are two totally different kinds of games, and if you confuse them, the consequences can be huge. Think about it like this. First, you've got finite games. Like a football game or a game of chess. Everybody knows who's playing, the rules are set in stone, and there's a clear end point where somebody wins and somebody loses. Simple. But then you have infinite games. In these games, new players can join anytime, the rules can change as you go, and there is no finish line. The whole objective isn't to win, it's just to keep the game going. And this is where it really clicks. Business is a classic infinite game, right? There's no final whistle where someone is declared the winner of business. Companies don't win, they just drop out of the game when they run out of the will and the resources to keep playing. So the real goal isn't to be number one this quarter. The goal is to build an organization that's strong enough and healthy enough to stay in the game for generations to come. So that leads to a huge question. What happens when leaders try to play this infinite game of business with a finite win-at-all-costs mindset? Well, you get into a real mess. A perfect case study for this is the old rivalry between Microsoft and Apple. Back in 2007, when the very first iPhone came out, Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer literally laughed it off. This quote is just the perfect snapshot of a finite mindset, focused completely on the current market, the current numbers, and totally blind to how the game itself was about to change. Under Ballmer, Microsoft became completely obsessed with beating its rival. It was a classic finite game. They poured a ton of money and resources into products like the Zune MP3 player, and the goal was super clear. Beat the iPod, win the market share battle. Their focus wasn't on some grand vision for the future, it was just defeat the other guy. Meanwhile, Apple, their head was in a totally different space. If you went to their events, they weren't talking about beating Microsoft. They were talking about their own cause. Things like empowering creativity, helping teachers teach, and helping students learn. They weren't obsessed with their competition. They were obsessed with pushing their own vision forward. They were only trying to outdo themselves. And the result of all this? Microsoft got stuck playing this game of whack-a-mole, always reacting to whatever Apple did next. That tunnel vision on winning missed them the entire bigger picture. While they were busy trying to build a slightly better iPod, Apple was over here inventing the iPhone and, changing the world. Okay, so if that finite mindset is a trap, what does it actually look like to lead with an infinite mindset? And what do you actually get out of it? What are the real benefits? When a leader really makes that shift to an infinite perspective, the whole vibe of the company changes. The focus moves away from short-term numbers and toward long-term strength. And that new focus, it builds deep trust and real cooperation. And that trust becomes the fuel for genuine innovation, making the whole organization incredibly resilient. And resilience is the key word here. A stable company might be able to survive a crisis and come out the other side pretty much the same. But a resilient company, one with that infinite mindset, it can actually be transformed by a crisis. It can emerge from the storm even stronger than it was before. For an incredible example of this, just look at Victorinox, the company that makes the Swiss Army knife. After 9/11, their main business was just destroyed, literally overnight, when knives got banned from all airline carry-on luggage. Now, a finite-minded company probably would have panicked, laid off a bunch of people, but Victorinox, a company that thinks in generations, not fiscal quarters, they saw an opportunity. They innovated, they expanded into totally new product lines, and they came out the other side even stronger. So how do you actually do this? Sinek is really clear that leading with an infinite mindset isn't just some belief you have. It's a discipline. It's something that you have to practice consistently. And the way Sinek describes it is perfect. He compares it to getting in shape, right? You can't just go to the gym for 9 hours on a Saturday and expect to be fit. It's the consistent, day in, day out effort that actually makes the difference. And adopting an infinite mindset is exactly the same. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a daily commitment to a set of practices. And here they are, the 5 essential practices. It all kicks off with advancing a just cause, having a clear, inspiring vision of the future that people are actually willing to sacrifice for. That purpose is what lets you build trusting teams, creating a safe space where people feel like they can be vulnerable and take risks. From that foundation, you can study your worthy rivals, not to crush them, but to learn from them and make yourself better. All of this prepares you for what Sinek calls existential flexibility. That's the ability to make huge, game-changing shifts to keep your cause alive. And finally, what holds it all together is the courage to lead, having the guts to prioritize your people and your cause over those short-term numbers. And really, it all starts right here, with this idea of a just cause. This is the why. This is the whole reason you come to work. It's not a finite goal like increase revenue by 10%. No. It's an idealistic vision, something like a world where everyone wakes up inspired to go to work. It's that cause that gives all the daily struggles meaning and makes the sacrifices feel worth it. So in the end, Sinek is really presenting us with a fundamental choice. We can take the finite path, a sprint towards some short-term victory that might feel good for a minute, but it doesn't last. Or we can choose the infinite path, a journey toward fulfillment, one that's longer, way more meaningful, and ultimately much more enduring. And that brings us right back to the central question. So I want you to take a second and look at your own career, your team, your life, and just ask yourself, what game am I playing? Am I playing for a temporary win? Or am I playing to build something, to contribute to a cause that's going to last long after I'm gone? Because as we've seen, the answer to that question, it really does change everything.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a really powerful concept from Simon Sinek's work, the infinite game. It's a way of thinking that completely flips the script on what it means to win in business, and instead asks us to focus on something much, much bigger, how to keep playing.
So let's just jump right in with a pretty fundamental question. In business or even in life, what's the goal? Is it to beat the competition, to be number one, or is it maybe something else entirely? Well, the answer really depends on what kind of game you think you're playing.
You see, it turns out that, according to the work of Professor James P. Cars, there are only 2 types of games in the world. And figuring out which one you're in, well, that might just be the most important strategic decision you'll ever make.
First up, you've got your finite games. These are the ones we all get. Think about football, right? You've got known players, a very clear set of rules, and an objective everyone agrees on. Score more points. And when that final whistle blows, someone wins, someone loses, and the game is over. Done.
But then there's the other kind, infinite games. Think about something like marriage, or your career, or business itself. In these games, you have known players and unknown players who can show up at any time. The rules are kind of flexible, and there's no finish line. You can't win at business, can you? The only real objective is to keep the game going, to stay in it for as long as you can.
And when you put them side by side like this, the difference is it's stark. Finite games are all about reaching an end state. Infinite games are all about perpetuating the game itself. One mindset is about winning for yourself, the other is about advancing something bigger than yourself.
So here's the big problem, the crucial mistake so many people make. Leaders are constantly trying to play an infinite game, like business, with a finite mindset. And when you do that, the results are almost always disastrous. It leads to a total breakdown of trust, cooperation, and innovation.
The finite-minded player gets totally stuck. They just burn through all their resources, their money, their people's energy, their goodwill, trying to win a game that literally has no finish line. They get exhausted, and sooner or later, they're forced to drop out.
A really powerful, real-world example of this is the Vietnam War. For the United States, it was a finite game. The goal was to achieve a specific political objective, declare victory, and go home. But for the North Vietnamese, as this incredible quote shows, it was an infinite game. It was a fight for their very survival. For them, this was just one more battle in a 1,000-year struggle for existence.
So in the end, America's incredible military power just didn't matter. You can't win against an opponent who isn't playing to win. They're just playing to outlast you. America didn't really lose the war in a conventional sense. They just ran out of the political will and the resources needed to keep playing a game their opponent was willing to play forever.
Now, this exact same dynamic plays out in the world of business all the time. And there's a classic story from the tech industry that shows these two fundamentally different mindsets in action.
So, Sinek talks about attending 2 separate education summits, one hosted by Microsoft and one by Apple. At the Microsoft event, nearly every presenter was obsessed with how they were going to beat Apple. But at the Apple event, they were obsessed with their cause, how to help teachers teach and students learn. One company was focused on their rival, the other was focused on their vision.
This finite mindset drove Microsoft to launch the Zune. The goal was pretty simple: take market share from the iPod. And honestly, by many technical measures, the Zune was a fantastic device. You could argue it was even better than the iPod. They brought a superior weapon to a finite battle.
But here's the thing. Apple wasn't even playing that game. When Sinek mentioned to a senior Apple executive just how much better the Zune was, the executive's response was incredible. He just smiled, totally unbothered, and said, "I have no doubt." He knew Apple wasn't competing with Microsoft. They were competing with themselves to advance their cause, which is what led them to create the iPhone and make both the Zune and the iPod totally obsolete.
That Apple story really shows us that playing the infinite game isn't just about surviving day to day. It's about building something way more valuable than short-term wins. It's about building organizational resilience.
Think about it this way. A stable company, a finite-minded one, tries to just weather the storm and get back to normal as quickly as possible. It's afraid of disruption. But a resilient, infinite-minded company, it expects the storm. It embraces surprises and uses that disruption as fuel to become something new, something even stronger.
A perfect example of this is Victorinox, the company that makes the Swiss Army knife. Before 9/11, knives were pretty much their entire business. Then overnight, that business was almost completely wiped out. A finite company would have panicked. Layoffs, cost-cutting, the whole deal. But Victorinox, they saw an opportunity. They refused to lay a single person off and instead completely reimagined their entire business.
And this quote from their CEO just says it all, doesn't it? That long-term generational perspective is what let them turn a potentially fatal crisis into their greatest moment of reinvention. They didn't just survive the disruption, they were transformed by it for the better.
Okay, so if this is the game we should all be playing, how do we actually do it? Well, Sinek lays out 5 essential practices for any leader who really wants to lead with an infinite mindset. Now, these are not steps on a checklist. You don't just do them and you're finished. Think of it more like exercise. You have to practice them consistently, day in and day out, to build and maintain the strength of your organization.
And you can see how they all work together in this beautiful, reinforcing cycle. Having a powerful just cause gives you the courage to lead, even when it's hard. Building trusting teams is what allows you to have existential flexibility when things go sideways. Studying your worthy rivals, well, that reveals your own weaknesses and pushes you to get better. Each one makes the others stronger.
And this stuff matters so much right now because, let's face it, our entire business culture, from Wall Street to our business schools, is pushing finite thinking. And we can see the consequences. The average lifespan of a major company has absolutely plummeted, from over 60 years down to less than 18. They're just not being built to last anymore. Which really leaves us with one final crucial thought. You don't get to choose if the game of business is finite or infinite. It is, by its very nature, infinite. But you do get to choose how you play. So, what game are you truly playing? Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to explore a concept so powerful that people have literally been willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for it. We're talking about a vision of the future that can inspire us to give everything, even our lives, for something bigger than ourselves.
So our story begins in one of history's absolute darkest moments, the Nazi siege of Leningrad, which started back in 1941. We're talking nearly 900 days of unimaginable suffering.
Over 1 million citizens died, and 400,000 of them were children. Most of them starved to death. People were driven to do things you can't even imagine just to stay alive. One survivor actually wrote about a mother whose 3-year-old died, and she would slice off a piece of his body each day just to feed her other child. That was the horrifying reality of the siege.
And yet, right in the middle of all this horror, there's a mystery. See, what most people didn't know was that there was this massive stash of food, tons of potatoes, rice, and seeds, hidden right in the heart of the city. And it was left completely untouched, protected by the very people who were starving. So, why?
Well, the answer lies with this man, Nikolai Vavilov. He was a visionary scientist who, because he grew up surrounded by famine, dedicated his entire life to ending hunger. His big idea was to create a backup of the world's food supply, a seed bank that could prevent future disasters. But in Stalin's Soviet Union, a vision like that made him a target. He was arrested on trumped-up charges, and then, in the most cruel twist of irony imaginable, the man who wanted to end world hunger died of malnutrition in a prison cell.
9. Just think about that number. 9. That's how many of Vavilev's scientists died of starvation during the siege, while they were surrounded by tons of rice, potatoes, and seeds they refused to eat. They literally chose to protect the future over their own survival.
One of the survivors explained their incredible resolve. He said they weren't just protecting seeds, they were protecting a future for all of humanity. It was a vision that was bigger than their own lives, bigger than the siege, bigger than the entire war. This was their just cause.
So what exactly is this powerful concept? This thing that inspires such a profound, almost unbelievable commitment? Let's break it down.
A just cause isn't about winning some finite game or hitting a quarterly target. No, it's a specific vision of a future world, a world that is so appealing that you are willing to make real sacrifices to help build it. It's the thing that gives your work, and maybe even your life, a much deeper sense of meaning.
Now this slide makes a really crucial distinction. You've probably heard about finding your why. Well, look on the left. Your why comes from your past. It's your origin story, it's who you are, and it's pretty much fixed. But a just cause, that's on the right, is all about the future. It's where you're going. Think of it like this. Your why is the foundation of a house. The just cause is the beautiful, idealized vision of the home you hope to build on it. It's a project you can work on for a lifetime. But here's the thing. A true just cause isn't just some vague, feel-good mission statement you hang on a wall. To be really powerful, it has to meet 5 essential standards. And here they are. A vision has to be for something, inclusive, service-oriented, resilient, and idealistic. This is basically the test, the checklist, to see if a cause really qualifies.
So first, it has to be for something. It's got to be an affirmative, optimistic vision. It's really easy to rally people against an enemy, but that's finite. Being for a positive future, well, that sparks imagination and hope. It's the difference between fighting against poverty and fighting for the right of every single person to provide for their family. One is about defeating a problem, the other is about building a possibility. And that kind of positive vision is naturally inclusive. It's an open invitation for anyone to come and help. Third, and this is a big one, it has to be service-oriented. What this means is that the primary benefit of all the work goes to other people. The customers, the community, the world, not the people doing the work. The second that benefit starts flowing mainly to the leaders or the shareholders, that's when you get a culture of self-interest. But when the cause is for the benefit of others, that's how you build deep, lasting trust and loyalty.
And finally, the cause has to be both resilient and idealistic. Resilient means it's bigger than whatever products you happen to sell. If the old railroad companies had seen themselves in the moving people business instead of the train business, they might own the airlines today. And idealistic means it's basically unachievable. Think about the Declaration of Independence's pursuit of equality. That's a journey with really important milestones, but there's no final destination. You never fully get there, and that's exactly why you keep striving. So let's see how this actually plays out in the real world. Lots of companies have those mission statements on the wall, right? But very few of them have a true just cause. Just look at the contrast here. It is night and day. On the left, you've got Vizio. Their mission is all about themselves, their products, their prices. It's finite. But on the right, Sweetgreen's mission is about a future state for other people, inspiring healthier communities. See? It's service-oriented, it's idealistic, and it's open for anyone to join in.
So let me ask you, which one inspires true sacrifice? One is just a description of a business model. The other is a call to action. Which one would make you feel like you're a part of something way bigger than yourself?
Okay, so once you've figured out your just cause, there is one last absolutely critical step you have to take to make sure it actually survives.
You have to write it down. I mean it. So many visionary leaders just assume that because the vision is crystal clear to them, it's clear to everyone else. But if it's not written down, the cause will inevitably get diluted and just disappear as people come and go. A founder's instinct can't be passed down, but a written cause absolutely can.
It really works like a compass. That's the perfect analogy. It allows future generations of leaders to navigate whatever challenges they face, new technologies, shifting markets, cultural changes, without ever losing sight of that ultimate destination. It ensures the journey can continue long after the original trailblazers are gone.
And that leaves us with this final question to think about. Your organization, your team, hey, maybe even you personally, you might have a mission, but do you have a just cause? Because a mission might tell you what you do, but a just cause tells the world why you should exist at all.
You hear these words all the time, right? Purpose, vision, mission. They're plastered all over corporate websites. Companies are constantly telling us they're here for more than just making money. But how much of that is actually true? And how much is just, good marketing? Let's dig in and figure out how to spot the difference. So I want you to do something for me. Think about your own company, or maybe one you really admire. They've got a purpose statement. I'm almost sure of it. But is it a real, living, breathing cause that guides them? Or is it just some nice-sounding words on a poster in the break room? We're going to play a little game I like to call Cause or No Cause to tell the real deal from the fakes. Okay, this right here, this is the heart of the whole thing. A real cause is all about playing what's called an infinite game. There's no finish line. The goal is just to keep pushing, to keep advancing the vision, forever. On the flip side, an imposter cause is finite. It has an expiration date. It's about winning one specific race, not about building something that lasts. So let's look at the most common imposters out there. First up, we've got the moonshot. You know what I'm talking about, that big, hairy, audacious goal. The kind of thing that gets everybody all fired up, feeling like they're a part of history in the making. And honestly, for good reason. I mean, just listen to that. Kennedy's speech was unbelievably powerful. It rallied an entire nation. It focused all their energy and skills on one incredible target. It sounds exactly like a just cause should, doesn't it? And this is why it's so darn tricky. A moonshot checks pretty much all the boxes. It's optimistic, it's for the good of everyone, and people are willing to sacrifice so much to achieve it. It really feels like a genuine cause. And that's why so many leaders fall right into this trap. But it has one single fatal flaw. And there it is. That's the core problem. Think about it. What happened after we landed on the moon? The mission was over. The game kept going, of course, but that specific goal was achieved. The inspiration itself had a built-in end date. A moonshot, by its very nature, is a finite game. So, here's the crucial takeaway. A moonshot is fantastic, but it has to exist inside of a bigger, infinite cause. For JFK, the true cause was the progress of all people. Getting to the moon was just one spectacular, finite step on that much longer, infinite journey. The moonshot itself can't be the whole journey.
Let's move on to our next imposter, and you'll see how these ideas build on each other. And I'm willing to bet this next one is going to sound really familiar. It's the corporate obsession with simply being the best. So, check out this old vision statement from Garmin. It's a classic. Notice how it's all about them. We will be the leader. Our products will be sought after. It's all very me, me, me. It puts the company at the center of the universe, not the people they're supposed to be serving. And that kind of thinking, well, it can be really dangerous. The story of Garmin shows you exactly why. In 2007, they were the best. No doubt about it, the best at making GPS hardware.
But their vision blinded them. Because they were so obsessed with being the best at making devices, they totally missed the real opportunity to develop the go-to navigation app when smartphones showed up. They were so busy defending their title that they missed the entire game shifting right under their feet. And that's the key difference right there. Best is a destination. It's a temporary title that you constantly have to defend. But better? Better is a journey. It's a direction, not a finish line. And it invites everyone to pitch in and make things better, all the time. In the infinite game, better is always, always better than best. Okay, on to our third imposter cause, and this is a big one: growth. I mean, everyone wants growth, but there's a huge danger when you start mistaking the fuel for the destination. This little story just explains it perfectly. Imagine you ask your neighbor, "Hey, where are you headed on vacation?" And they just reply, "On vacation." So you ask, "Okay, but how will you get there?" And they say, "My goal is to drive 300 miles per day." You'd think they were nuts, right? It's absurd. You know the method, but you have no clue about the destination. Well, that's exactly what a company sounds like when its only purpose is growth. So let's be crystal clear about this. Growth, and all the money that comes with it, is the fuel. It's the resource that lets you keep moving forward, to keep advancing your actual cause. You don't buy a car just so you can buy more gas. No, you buy a car to go somewhere. Growth is the gas, your just cause is the destination. All right, let's talk about our final imposter cause. And this one can be the sneakiest of all because it often looks the most like a real purpose. I'm talking about corporate social responsibility, or CSR. So this is the traditional way of thinking. A company with a finite mindset has its business over here where it makes a profit. Then it takes a little bit of that money and uses it to do good over there. Sponsoring a charity, organizing a volunteer day, all of that is good stuff, but it's treated like a completely separate activity. It's like an ornament you hang on the business. But an infinite-minded organization flips this whole idea on its head. It's not about making money so that you can do good. The cause is woven into the very fabric of how the business operates. You make money by doing good. The way you treat your employees, your customers, and your community is how you build a strong, resilient organization. It's not a formula. It's a way of life. So let's just recap what we figured out. A true just cause isn't just a big, flashy goal with an end date. It isn't a temporary title like the best that you have to defend. It's not a metric like growth. And it is definitely not a side project you do after the real work is done. It's the infinite context for everything the organization does. And that brings us right back to the beginning with one final question for you to really think about. Look at your own organization's purpose. Is it a true destination, that ideal future you're all working so hard to build? Or is it just the fuel, a temporary goal, a ranking, or just a number to get you through the next quarter? Because the answer to that question makes all the difference in the world.
Today, we're digging into what happens when a company seems to lose its soul, and, more importantly, how it might just get it back. We're going to do it by looking at the story of a true corporate giant, Walmart.
You've probably seen this happen, right? A brand you once loved, a company that really seemed to stand for something, just feels different all of a sudden. Kind of hollow. So what is actually going on there?
Well, it almost always boils down to one simple but really powerful idea. They've lost their cause. That's the original vision, the big idea that made them so great in the first place.
To really see how this plays out in the real world, let's dive into a perfect case study, the pretty dramatic tale of Walmart's rise, its fall, and its attempt at a comeback.
For decades, Walmart was this incredible American success story, all built on a very clear mission. But look what happens after 2009. A new CEO comes in, and suddenly the company's reputation just tanks. It gets buried under an avalanche of lawsuits, protests, and scandals.
This was the original Just Cause. It was never just about cheap stuff. Sam Walton's whole vision was about actually improving people's lives. It was this big, inspiring mission that employees and customers could really get behind.
And here's the price you pay for letting that vision fade. I mean, it gets ugly. Instead of towns welcoming Walmart, people were actively fighting to keep them out. Morale inside the company just collapsed, and they were constantly bogged down by investigations. The magic was gone.
So to really understand what went wrong, we've got to get a little more specific about what Sam Walton actually created. Let's break down this idea of a just cause. Okay, here's the textbook definition.
A just cause isn't a simple goal like, let's increase profits by 10%. No, it's an infinite vision of the future. Something like a world where everyone can have a better life. It's a mission people genuinely want to join.
And this is the key. This wasn't some fluffy slogan on a poster in the break room. For Sam Walton, this cause was everything. It dictated where they built stores, how they treated customers. It was the entire operating system of the company. But then, a new leader comes along with a very, very different operating system. And this is what our source material calls the finite mindset trap.
When Mike Duke took the reins as CEO in 2009, this is part of what he said. Now, on the surface, it sounds fine, pretty standard corporate speak. But if you look really close, you can spot the problem.
The secret is hiding in plain sight. Just look at the order of what he says. What did he put first? And maybe more importantly, what did he put dead last?
And there it is. Duke kicks things off with market share and shareholders. The customer, the very reason Walton started the company, is an afterthought. He literally turned the original cause completely upside down. The focus went from people to spreadsheets.
So, if promoting a really skilled operator like Duke was the problem, what's the solution? Well, the idea here is to radically rethink the top job itself.
This is such a great point. I mean, think about it. We all know what a chief financial officer does, right? They manage the money. Chief technology officer, they handle the tech. But chief executive officer? The title is so vague, it doesn't actually tell you what their most important job is.
It really comes down to this powerful distinction. A true leader's number one job isn't to manage the day-to-day plan. It's to hold the dream, to constantly talk about the vision that inspires the plan in the first place. And that leads to this idea for a new title, the Chief Vision Officer. A CVO isn't just an executive, they are the official keeper of the cause. Their focus is always on the long term, on that infinite future, not just on hitting the numbers for the next 3 months.
But hey, a visionary can't do it all by themselves. This isn't about getting rid of the people who make the trains run on time. It's about creating a powerful partnership at the very top.
Here's how it's supposed to work. You've got the visionary, the CVO, who is always looking up and out toward that distant horizon. And then you have the operator, your COO, your CFO, who looks down and in on the nitty-gritty of the business right now. One owns the dream, the other owns the plan. They need each other.
And this is the piece that so many organizations get wrong. We have this idea that the best operator should get promoted to CEO, but the skills that make you a great COO, being obsessed with efficiency, process, short-term results, are a totally different set of skills from what a CVO needs. It's a different job, not just a higher rung on the ladder.
Okay, so let's bring it all home. Let's go back to our story. What ended up happening at Walmart after all that damage was done?
Check this out. It's pretty amazing. When the next CEO, Doug McMillon, took over, he put out his own statement of priorities, and he literally flipped the order. Delivering value to customers was right back at number 1. The just cause was at the top of the list again.
By doing this, McMillon was essentially acting as the Chief Vision Officer. He pointed the entire massive company back towards its original North Star, its original cause, and set it up to play for the long haul, not just for the next quarter.
And all of this leaves us with one final big question to think about. In your company, on your team, heck, even in your own life, who is protecting the original vision? Who is the keeper of the cause?
Something is going fundamentally wrong with modern business, and it's causing companies to fail faster than ever. But here's the thing. It's probably not what you think. It isn't really about technology or even competition. It comes down to one single powerful idea that completely changed the game. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into that idea and explore a whole new way of looking at the true purpose of a company.
All right, so let's kick things off with a bit of a corporate whodunit. The big mystery we need to solve is this. Why on earth are companies dying out so much faster today than at any other point in history?
Get this. Back in the 1950s, if you were an average public company, you were expected to be around for more than 60 years. I mean, these weren't just businesses, they were institutions, built to last for generations.
Okay, now let's jump to today. That number, it's absolutely plummeted to less than 20 years. That's a drop of more than 65%. It is a corporate graveyard out there. So what happened? What or who is the culprit?
Now, the first thing that probably pops into your head is
disruption, right? Technological disruption. We hear it all the time. Some new tech comes along and just wipes out the old guard. But is that really the whole story? Is disruption the actual cause?
Well, not exactly. According to our source, disruption is just what we see on the surface. It's like looking at a wilting plant. The real problem is deeper, down in the roots. It's a kind of systemic short-sightedness that has basically poisoned the soil for the entire business world.
And you know, this short-sightedness, it didn't just happen by accident. You can actually trace it back to a single, incredibly influential essay that came out in 1970, an idea that completely rewrote the rules of business.
And here it is. This is the idea that changed everything. In 1970, the Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman argued in the New York Times Magazine that the one and only social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits, period. Nothing else matters.
This idea got a name: shareholder primacy. And the logic, well, it seems pretty simple. The shareholders own the company, so the executives work for them. And what's their one job? Make that share price go up. And this simple idea, it became the undisputed law of the land and business.
Just to give you a sense of how radical this was, take a look at this. On one side, you have the original father of capitalism, Adam Smith. He believed the entire point of a business was to serve the customer. But Friedman's idea completely flipped that on its head. He put the shareholder at the very top, and everything else, including the customer, came second.
So what did this big shift from focusing on the customer to focusing on the shareholder actually look like in the real world? Let's take a look at capitalism before and after the Friedman doctrine really took hold.
So before this all changed, executives often saw themselves as, well, stewards of a public trust. They felt a real responsibility to everyone involved: employees, suppliers, the community, and the shareholders. Lifelong careers were a common thing, and the idea of laying off thousands of people just to bump up a quarterly stock price, it was basically unheard of.
Then came the change. And wow, nothing shows it more clearly than this chart on CEO pay. Back in 1978, the average CEO made about 30 times more than their average employee. Fast forward to 2016, and that ratio had exploded by over 800% to 271 to 1. You can see exactly where the money started flowing, straight to the top.
And you can just watch this shift accelerate on this timeline. After Friedman's theory gets published in 1970, the 1980s become the first time we see mass layoffs used as a common strategy. By the 90s, that focus on short-term profits gets even more intense. And all this pressure just keeps building and building until the whole system's instability is laid bare for everyone to see in the 2008 financial crisis.
So that begs the question, if this system is so obviously damaging in the long run, why do so many leaders, even ones who privately admit they don't like it, keep playing this finite game?
Well, the answer comes down to immense systemic pressure. You can think of it like this. Leaders are basically caught in a vice. They're getting squeezed relentlessly by Wall Street analysts, by venture capitalists, by investors, all demanding the same thing: faster growth and higher returns, right now. Here's a great way to think about the mindset. Imagine the difference between driving a rental car and driving a car you actually own. You might floor it in a rental to get where you're going fast, because who cares about long-term maintenance, right? That's kind of how many short-term shareholders treat companies. They see them as just a vehicle for a quick buck, with very little thought for the company's long-term health.
But a pressure cooker like this can't last forever. After decades of this kind of intense, short-term thinking, the system is really starting to show some serious cracks. You can hear the drums of change beginning to beat.
I mean, the red flags are getting impossible to ignore. Trust is just eroding. The number of Americans invested in the stock market has hit a 20-year low. Even powerful insiders are sounding the alarm. Like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock. We're talking the world's largest asset manager, who's been calling for companies to have a sense of purpose that goes beyond just profit. This growing feeling of imbalance has also fueled populist movements all across the political spectrum.
And this leads to a really crucial warning. Where there is this much unbalance, there will eventually be unrest. History has shown us time and again that if leaders don't fix a broken system from within, the public will eventually demand it be torn down from the outside.
So, this brings us to the biggest question of all. If Milton Friedman's definition of business is broken, what do we replace it with? What should the new responsibility of business actually look like?
Well, Our source suggests a new definition, one that's built on 3 pillars and in a very specific order. The number 1 responsibility is to advance a purpose, to contribute something valuable to the world beyond just a product. Number 2 is to protect people. That means your employees, your customers, and the communities you operate in. And then number 3, finally, is to generate a profit.
See the order there? It's really important. Profit is still absolutely essential. No one's denying that. But in this new model, it's not the destination. It's the fuel. Profit is what allows a business to keep driving towards its real purpose and protecting its people, not just for the next quarter, but for the long haul.
And you know, this isn't some crazy new idea. It's actually a return to a much older one. Over 100 years ago, Henry Ford himself said, "A business that makes nothing but money is a poor kind of business." It's just a powerful reminder that maybe, somewhere along the way, we lost our path, and that the true value of a company has always been about more than just the bottom line.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. Take a look at the companies you deal with every single day, the ones you work for, the ones you buy from, maybe even the ones you invest in. And ask yourself, are they just in the business of making money? Or are they in the business of fueling a purpose that actually makes the world a little bit better? The answer might just change how you see everything.
You know, every single leader makes a choice that pretty much defines everything. Their performance, their culture, even their ability to survive a crisis. It's a choice between 2 fundamental currencies. And to really get what this means, let me tell you a story that starts with a simple cup of coffee in a Las Vegas hotel.
So, meet Noah. He's a barista at the Four Seasons. And when a guest asks him, "Do you like your job?" Noah looks him right in the eye, doesn't even hesitate, and says, "I love my job." And that one word, love, well, it changes everything.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Because like is rational, right? You like your coworkers, you like the challenge, it makes sense. But love is emotional. That's a completely different standard. It points to this deep personal connection that goes way, way beyond just a paycheck. So what on earth creates that feeling?
Okay, so what is the source of that love? To figure that out, you got to look at the whole picture of Noah's work life. Because you see, the Four Seasons, that's only half the story. Here's the kicker. It's the same Noah in both jobs. At the Four Seasons, his managers are always asking things like, "How can I help you succeed?" He feels supported. He feels like he can be himself. But then there's his other job. There, the managers are just trying to catch him doing something wrong. So what does he do? He keeps his head down and just tries to get through the day. Same person, totally different performance. The only thing that's different is the environment.
And this just nails the crucial point perfectly. When performance is down, we so often blame the people. But Noah's story shows us that's almost always a mistake. The real difference maker isn't the employee, it's the environment that the leadership creates for them.
So this just forces us to rethink the most fundamental question of leadership. For way too long, leaders have been asking, how do I get the most out of my people? As if there's some kind of resource to be squeezed. The better question, the one that leads to people like Noah, is how do I create an environment where my people can show up and be their natural best?
Okay, so this whole shift in thinking from squeezing to nurturing, that brings us right to the heart of this explainer. It's all about understanding the 2 currencies that every organization runs on, will versus resources.
So on one hand, you've got resources. That's all the easy stuff to count, right? Money, profit, revenue, it's tangible, and it usually comes from outside the company, from customers. But on the other side, you have will. And this stuff is intangible. It's morale, it's motivation, commitment. It's basically the sum of all the human parts that come from within the organization.
Now, any leader will tell you that both are important, and of course they are. But here's the thing, you can't truly prioritize them equally. When the pressure's on and a really tough choice has to be made, every single leader has a bias. They're forced to sacrifice one for the other. And that choice, well, that choice reveals everything about who they are as a leader.
So you can probably guess the biggest pushback to this idea of prioritizing will, right? It's simple. It's too expensive. We just can't afford it. But is that actually true? Let's dig into the business case.
Angela Arendts, who used to run all of retail for Apple, she put her finger right on the problem. In that old-school business mindset, especially in industries like retail with high turnover, the logic is, why would I invest a lot in people who are just going to leave anyway? They're just seen as a line item on a spreadsheet, an expense to be managed down.
But when Arendts actually ran the numbers at Apple, she found something that was absolutely stunning. The actual incremental cost of all the investments they made in their retail employees. Better pay,
Great benefits, stock options, the whole thing was zero. Zilch. Nothing. How is that even possible?
Well, it's possible because when you invest in your people, you eliminate other massive costs. Just think about it for a second. Companies like Apple and Costco offer amazing benefits, they help pay for education, they have higher wages, but all of that money is saved, and then some because they aren't constantly bleeding cash to recruit and train replacements for people who keep quitting. And the results are just staggering. I mean, look at this. Apple and Costco have employee retention rates around 90%. The rest of the retail industry? It averages a dismal 20 to 30%. That gap isn't just a number on a chart. It represents millions of dollars saved and a workforce that is stable, experienced, and genuinely motivated.
So, investing in will clearly pays off when times are good. But what happens when things go bad? The ultimate test of any culture comes during a crisis, and there is no better example of this than the story of the Container Store.
For 30 years, the Container Store was an absolute rocket ship. We're talking 20% growth year after year after year. Then, 2008 happened. The Great Recession hit, and for the first time in their history, sales plummeted. Leadership had to slash expenses, and they had to do it fast.
So here's the choice they made. Instead of layoffs, they decided that everyone would share the burden together. They froze salaries and they froze 401k matches. But what happened next is what's truly mind-blowing. The employees didn't just accept it, they took it upon themselves to find more ways to save the company money. They voluntarily downgraded their hotels on business trips, paid for their own meals, they even went to their vendors and asked them to help find savings. The company's co-founder, Kip Tyndall, he was just blown away. He called it a display of spontaneous love and devotion. A top-down order to do this would have caused a rebellion, but because it came from the people themselves, morale actually went up, in the middle of a crisis. But here is the most crucial part of the whole story. It wasn't spontaneous at all. This incredible response was the direct payoff of a 30-year investment in their people. For decades, they had prioritized their employees' well-being, paid them well, and treated them like human beings. And when the company was in trouble, the people gave all of that trust and respect right back.
And this brings us to the final and maybe most essential takeaway for any leader. It's about getting crystal clear on what you can actually control and what you can't.
Seriously, think about it. As a leader, you have very little control over the economy, or the market, or what customers want next week. Those are all the external things that impact your resources. But you have near total control over your company culture, over how you treat your people, over the environment you create every single day. You have near total control over the source of will.
And that right there is why this matters so much. Resources, by their very nature, are finite. They can and do run out. But will, the motivation, the trust, the commitment of your people, that can be a renewable, almost infinite supply if you cultivate it properly. The organizations that get this are simply more resilient. They can weather any storm.
So we end right back where we started, with a simple choice. When the pressure is on, when the hard times inevitably show up and you are forced to choose, which one do you sacrifice? The trust, the motivation, and the will of your people, or your resources? Your answer to that question defines exactly the kind of leader you are.
So what's the single most important ingredient for a high-performing team? You know, what's the secret sauce? Is it just raw talent? The best resources? Maybe just pure grit? Well, you might be surprised to hear that for some of the most elite teams on the entire planet, the secret isn't any of those things. It's actually something much more human. It's the hidden engine behind some of the most successful groups in the world. Let's dive in and see how it works. All right, to kick things off, we're going to one of the most hostile work environments you can possibly imagine, a massive deep-water oil rig floating out in the middle of the ocean. Here, some of the toughest workers in the world were about to face a challenge they absolutely never saw coming. I want you to just imagine this for a second. You're a hardened oil rig worker, and your boss gathers everyone for a new kind of training. You're probably pretty cynical, right? Well, this quote right here, it just perfectly sums up the feeling in the room. This was the reaction from the crew on the Shell Ursa drilling platform. They figured they had way better things to do than sit through some workshop. And you got to understand, the scale of this operation was just immense. The Ursa was an engineering marvel. We're talking 48 stories tall, operating in an environment so dangerous that one tiny mistake could be fatal. And the man in charge, Rick Fox, was a tough guy's tough guy. He was all about safety and performance, and he was not the kind of person you'd expect to embrace some soft, touchy-feely approach. Okay, and this is where the story gets really wild. So Fox gets this cold call from a woman named Claire Newer, a leadership consultant and, get this, a Holocaust survivor. Her proposal? If he really wanted his crew to be safe and successful, these tough-as-nails roughnecks needed to learn how to express their feelings. Now, Fox himself thought showing your feelings was a sign of weakness, but surprisingly, he was open to it. He actually decided to give this totally radical experiment a shot.
So the experiment began, and day after day, these calloused, hardened crew members sat in circles and just talked. But not about work. They talked about their childhoods, their relationships, their biggest fears. At one point, one man just broke down in tears, talking about his son's terminal illness. They were learning to be vulnerable, to really listen, and to see the actual human being behind that tough guy mask.
So, you're probably wondering, did all this ooey-gooey stuff actually work? Well, as these techniques started to spread throughout Shell, the company saw a staggering 84% decline in accidents. 84%! This was no coincidence. It was a direct result of people finally feeling safe enough to say, hey, I made a mistake, or I need help, without fear of getting chewed out.
And it wasn't just about safety, not by a long shot. The Ursa's actual performance went through the roof. I mean, its uptime hit almost perfect levels, and its production soared to 43% above all the industry benchmarks. The big lesson here is that by putting trust first, they unlocked a level of performance that they never, ever thought was possible. Now, the story of the Ursa crew is incredible, right? But was it just a fluke, a one-off? Not at all. In fact, this exact same principle is the absolute bedrock of one of the most elite organizations on Earth, the Navy SEALs. You see, the core concept at play here is something called psychological safety. It's exactly what the Ursa crew built in those circles. It's that feeling deep down that you can be vulnerable, that you can admit you messed up or ask for help without being punished or shamed for it. This is the absolute foundation of a trusting team. So how do the SEALs actually think about this? Well, they have this incredibly simple but powerful matrix. They evaluate every single team member on two axes. On the vertical axis, you have performance. That's their skill. And on the horizontal axis, you have trust. That's their character. So let's break this down because this is really important. The SEALs discovered that the person in that top left corner, the high performer with low trust, is actually a toxic team member. Yeah, they might have skills, but their self-interest and their habit of blaming others literally poisons the entire group. They would much, much rather have the medium performer who always has the team's back. And here it is, stated as plainly as possible. This is the radical conclusion from one of the highest performing teams in the world. They prioritize character over pure competence. They would rather have someone they can trust with their lives than the most technically skilled person in the room. Just let that sink in. Okay, so if the SEALs figured this out, why do so many organizations fall right into the performance trap? Why do they end up rewarding the very same people the SEALs would cut from their teams? Let's take a look at the corporate world for a second. Just look at this table. The contrast is, wow, it's stark. While the SEALs are measuring performance versus trust, a corporate culture like the one at GE under Jack Welch was measuring performance versus, well, future performance or potential. Trust wasn't even on the chart. It wasn't part of the equation. And what's the consequence of a system like that? Well, in that kind of culture, toxic low-trust behavior gets a pass, or is even rewarded, as long as the numbers look good. It encourages people to compete with each other, to hoard information, to sabotage their own colleagues. And that ultimately destroys trust and, in the long run, the organization itself. But what happens when a leader actively tries to reverse that kind of damage? This next story of transformation is amazing. It shows how you can intentionally rebuild trust right from the ground up. So let me introduce you to Officer Jake Coyle of the Castle Rock Police Department. By all counts, this guy was a problem officer. We're talking allegations of sleeping on patrol, using his badge to get out of a ticket. He was facing multiple investigations. His colleagues went and talked to him, and he absolutely hated his job. But then a new police chief, Jack Cawley, arrived. And he looked at Officer Coyle, and he saw something totally different. He didn't see a bad apple. He saw the product of a toxic culture, a place where officers felt disposable and undervalued. He suspected the environment was the problem, not the person. So instead of firing Coyle, Chief Cawley did the completely unexpected. He gave him a second chance. He looked him in the eye and said, "I believe in you." And then he started the hard work of building what he called a circle of safety for the entire department. It started with simple things, like building a fence around the parking lot so his officers felt physically and, by extension, psychologically safe.
And the result? Coyle completely turned his career around. I mean, a 180-degree turn. Today, he is one of the most respected and trusted officers in the entire department. In fact, he's now responsible for training the new recruits. A total transformation, all because one leader decided to build trust first. So, we've been to a high-stakes oil rig, we've trained with the Navy SEALs, and we've been on patrol with the police. Let's pull all these powerful lessons together for the big finish.
So what's the common thread here? Well, the Shell USA story teaches us that vulnerability is what builds the psychological safety you need for elite performance. The Navy SEALs prove that who you trust is way more important than what you can do. And the Castle Rock Police Department shows us that it is the leader's #1 job to build that circle of safety where trust can actually grow. And that leaves us with one final big question for you to think about. I want you to look at your own team, your own organization. What gets celebrated? Is it just the numbers? Just individual performance? Or is it the character, the teamwork, and the trust that is the true engine of sustainable elite performance? What are you really rewarding?
You ever wonder how these massive corporate scandals actually happen? It's not some lone evil genius pulling all the strings. Nope, it's usually thousands of ordinary, everyday people. And the reason why is this fascinating phenomenon called ethical fading. It's all about how good people just like you and me, can end up doing some really, really bad things.
So let's start with a number, a huge one. Between 2011 and 2016, employees at Wells Fargo opened up 3.5 million fake bank and credit card accounts. And listen, this wasn't some computer glitch or a simple mistake. Oh no, this was a deliberate, massive, widespread practice.
So what was the fallout from that? Well, here's another number for you. This is the human cost, at least on the inside. A staggering 5,300 employees were fired for their involvement. To put that into perspective, that's more people than you could fit into most concert halls. Just gone.
And what did the executives say? You guessed it, they trotted out the classic line. But hold on a second, does that really add up? Over 5,000 people over several years, and that's just a few bad apples? No way. It sounds a lot more like the entire orchard was sick, right? The real cause wasn't a handful of greedy individuals. It was a full-blown cultural disease.
And that disease, well, it actually has a name. So let's get into the diagnosis, not just for what happened at Wells Fargo, but for what could be happening in a lot of organizations right now. So what is this thing? At its very core, ethical fading is a process of self-deception. I mean, think about it. People don't just wake up one morning and decide, you know what, I'm going to be evil today. It's way more subtle than that. It's like an infection that starts with small, seemingly harmless choices, and it allows people to act against their own values without ever really feeling like they've crossed the line. And these are the perfect breeding grounds for that infection to spread. It starts when a company becomes completely obsessed with short-term numbers. That creates this intense, crushing pressure to hit targets no matter what. And when people hit them, they get rewarded, no questions asked about how they did it. Pretty soon, everybody starts telling themselves the same story. Hey, this is what management wants. It's just the name of the game. It's the only way to get ahead.
Okay, so let's dig into the psychology here. How does this actually work inside our own heads? Well, it really boils down to two key ingredients that make ethical fading so dangerously effective: intense pressure and good old-fashioned self-deception.
First up, pressure. What happens when you take genuinely good people and put them under an insane amount of pressure? It's a fundamental question, and to find an answer, we can look at this incredible psychology experiment from back in 1973 that put some of the best people to the ultimate test.
Okay, you have to hear this. Researchers got a bunch of seminary students. We're talking people literally studying to become priests, and had them prepare a talk on, of all things, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Then, they sent them across campus, but they cranked up the time pressure on different groups. Along the way, each student walked past an actor who was slumped over, clearly in distress. Now look at these results. When there was no rush, 63% stopped to help. Makes sense. But when they were told they were late, under high pressure, that number plummeted to just 10%. Some of them, and this is the wildest part, literally stepped over the person to get to their talk about helping people. The conclusion is just chilling. Enough pressure can make even the best of us ignore our deepest values. But here's the thing, pressure is only half the equation. It creates the motivation to cut corners. To actually go through with it, you need to be able to lie to yourself. You need self-deception. And for a perfect, jaw-dropping case study in this, we have to talk about the Mylan EpiPen scandal.
Just look at how this all unfolded. In 2007, Mylan buys the EpiPen brand. Over the next few years, they start slowly inching the price up on this life-saving drug. But then, boom. In 2014, a massive bonus is put on the table for executives if they can double earnings. So what happens? The price hikes go into absolute overdrive, until a 2-pack that once cost around $100 is now $600. You see how that works? Each little step might have seemed justifiable in a boardroom, but the final result was absolutely outrageous.
And if you want to know the mindset behind that, this quote from the CEO at the time tells you everything you need to know. There's no remorse, no accountability. Instead, she just blames the system. It's such a classic self-deception move, isn't it? You frame your own unethical actions as just, the way the world works. It's a neat little trick to erase any personal responsibility.
And this brings up another powerful tool for lying to ourselves: corporate jargon, or euphemisms. We are masters at using fancy words to soften a harsh reality. We're not polluting the environment, we're managing externalities. We don't fire our people, we're reducing headcounts. We're not engineering addiction into an app, we're using gamification. These words act like a buffer, creating a comfortable distance between what we're actually doing and how we feel about it.
So, you mix that intense pressure with these handy tools for self-deception, and what do you get? You get a classic slippery slope. Every small, unethical step that goes unchecked just makes the next, slightly bigger step feel normal. Mylan didn't just wake up one day and decide to raise the price by 500%. They did it bit by bit, getting a little more comfortable each time until a price that seems insane to us looked perfectly reasonable to them.
So, if your organization finds itself on that slippery slope, how do you fix it? How do you stop the slide? Let's talk about the common response, which, spoiler alert, is totally flawed, and then we'll get to the real antidote. This is the go-to move for most companies. Something goes wrong, and what's the knee-jerk reaction? More rules, more compliance training, more paperwork. It's a concept called lazy leadership. And it's lazy because, honestly, it's so much easier to trust a new process than it is to do the hard work of actually building trust with your people.
And here is the great irony. This approach completely backfires. When you just pile more rules and impossible requirements onto an already broken culture, people don't magically become more ethical. They just get more creative at finding ways to check the boxes and keep the managers happy. The cheating becomes the new norm, and the ethical fading actually gets worse, not better.
The real solution requires a complete shift in perspective. It's about adopting what's called an infinite mindset, and that really comes down to 2 big things. First, you have to establish a just cause, a purpose, a reason for being, that goes way beyond just making a profit. And second, you have to build trusting teams, where people feel a deep sense of accountability, not to a rule book, but to each other.
Okay, but all this infinite mindset talk, does it actually work in the real world, or is it just a nice idea? Well, let's look at a company that has made it their absolute foundation, Patagonia.
Picture this. It's Black Friday, the biggest shopping day of the entire year. And Patagonia takes out a full-page ad in the New York Times with this headline: "Why on earth would a company tell people not to buy its own product?" Simple. Because their culture is the polar opposite of one suffering from ethical fading. That ad went on to detail the full environmental costs of making one of their own jackets. That's what they do. They are brutally honest, they take full ownership of their actions, and they are driven by a cause. For them, profit isn't the goal. It's just the fuel they need to advance their mission. This table really lays out the difference in black and white. On one side, you've got the finite mindset of a Wells Fargo or Mylan. The focus is all on short-term results. When problems pop up, you blame bad apples or the system. And ethics? That's just an obstacle, a constraint to be managed. On the other side, you've got the infinite mindset of Patagonia. The focus is on a just cause. Problems lead to self-assessment and accountability. And ethics isn't a constraint, it's the very foundation of the business.
And what's the outcome of building a business on this ethical foundation? Is it just a feel-good story? Not at all. It's an amazing business story. While building this incredible trust and fierce loyalty, Patagonia has quadrupled its revenue. This proves that doing the right thing isn't some extra cost you have to carry. It's a massive competitive advantage. So this leaves us with one final, crucial question to think about. I want you to take a hard look at your own team, your own organization. Are the small things being ignored? Is the pressure to perform forcing people to cut corners? Is your culture slowly descending down a slippery slope, or is it built on a solid ethical foundation? The answer matters more than you can possibly imagine.
You know that one competitor? The one whose name just kind of gets under your skin? Yeah, we've all got one. But what if that feeling, that rivalry, isn't something to push away? What if it's actually the secret to getting a whole lot better? In this explainer, we're going to flip the whole idea of competition on its head.
This feeling, it's so raw, and it's exactly where our story kicks off. This comes from Simon Sinek, and he's being super honest about a professional rival he had. He knew the guy was good, he respected him, but he just could not shake that ugly feeling of envy. I mean, who can't relate to that, right? And of course, that feeling didn't just sit there. It grew into this obsession. It became a daily thing, checking the online book rankings. He'd get this little high when his book was on top, and then this wave of annoyance when his rival's was. His focus wasn't even on his own work anymore. It was all about this silly, arbitrary score against this one other person.
Then, in this moment of clarity, he's literally on stage right next to his rival. A huge question hits him. What if this constant need to win, this whole obsession with beating a competitor, what if it's actually just holding us back? What if it's a trap we're setting for ourselves?
And that question, well, it gets right to the heart of the problem, the competitor obsession. It's what happens when we treat things like our careers or our businesses, which don't have a finish line, like they're a football game. We fall for this idea that there has to be a winner and a loser, and we end up trying to win a race that, by its very nature, can't actually be won.
The big aha moment was this. Realizing the intense focus on his rival had absolutely nothing to do with the rival himself. It was all about his own stuff. His rival's strengths were basically just shining a giant spotlight on his own insecurities. And let's be honest, it was just easier to focus on beating the other guy than to do the really hard work of improving himself.
Okay, so if that's the trap, how do you get out of it? Well, you have to make a really crucial mental shift. You stop looking for competitors you want to beat, and you start identifying rivals who actually make you better. This is the whole idea of a worthy rival.
So, what is a worthy rival? The key here is that it's someone you choose. They're good. Maybe they're even better than you in some areas. You don't have to like them. You don't even have to agree with them. You just have to be willing to admit that they have strengths that show you where you're weak. And that pushes you to get better just to keep up. Now, this is where it gets really clear. Look at this breakdown. The person with a competitor mindset is all about winning, beating the other guy, and scarcity, this idea that there's only so much success to go around. But the person with a worthy rival, they've got an infinite mindset. They're focused on improving themselves, on the process, and on abundance, the idea that lots of people can be successful at the same time.
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but does it actually work in the real world? Oh, you bet it does. Let's look at some incredible, real-world examples of this whole idea in action, how it fueled some amazing turnarounds and helped define some of the most iconic brands out there.
All right, picture this. You just got hired to save Ford Motor Company. They are bleeding money and market share. A reporter asks you what kind of car you drive, and you say this. The new CEO of Ford admitting that a competitor, Toyota, makes the best car in the world. I mean, it sounds like a PR nightmare, but it was actually the first step in one of the biggest corporate turnarounds ever. And this is just a masterclass in strategy. Mulally didn't try to trash Toyota. He used them as a worthy rival. He admitted Ford was weak. He made his top execs drive the competition's cars. He used Toyota as the benchmark for quality, and then, get this, the most amazing step of all, during the 2008 financial crisis, he went public and endorsed the government bailout of his biggest rivals, GM and Chrysler. Why would he do that? Because he knew if they went under, the whole industry, including Ford, would suffer. That is playing the infinite game.
Okay, let's jump to another classic rivalry. In 1981, IBM, the absolute Goliath of the computing world, decided to get into personal computers. And who was right in their crosshairs? Apple, the little, scrappy leader of the PC revolution. I mean, this should have been absolutely terrifying for them.
But instead of freaking out, what did Apple do? They did this. They took out a full-page ad welcoming their massive new rival to the game. And this wasn't just some cocky move. It was a brilliant strategy to frame IBM not as a monster to be beaten, but as a worthy rival who would help them advance their own cause.
Apple used IBM as the perfect foil,
IBM was the Navy, corporate, buttoned up, predictable. So Apple positioned themselves as the pirates, creative, rebellious, different. By embracing IBM as their rival, Apple didn't have to fight over specs and price. They got to fight a battle of ideas. IBM was for companies, Apple was for the individual revolutionaries. It made it crystal clear why Apple existed.
But here's the thing. This strategy takes real courage, and it is so easy to get wrong. Decades later, another company faced a huge threat from Apple, and they went down a very, very different path. Let's talk about BlackBerry.
It's almost hard to remember now, but in 2009, even after the iPhone was out, BlackBerry was an absolute giant. They had a massive 20% of the market. They owned the corporate world with their reputation for security and that keyboard. They were literally on top of the world.
But as the iPhone just kept getting more and more popular, BlackBerry panicked. Instead of using Apple as a worthy rival to double down on what made them great, security, reliability, that keyboard, they switched to a finite mindset. They tried to beat Apple at its own game by just copying the iPhone. And in doing so, they threw away everything that made them special. The result? It was catastrophic. In just 4 years, their market share plummeted from 20% to less than 1%.
So we see how powerful a worthy rival can be. But what happens when that rival just disappears? This is where the whole idea gets even bigger. It's so easy to think that if your main competitor drops out, then hey, you've won. But in an infinite game, that is a really dangerous illusion.
Just think about the Cold War. When the Berlin Wall came down, the United States declared victory. But it wasn't a win. The Soviet Union, its worthy rival for decades, had simply run out of the money and the will to keep playing. The game itself wasn't over.
See, by believing it had won, America didn't see that the game had simply changed. And what we could call Cold War 1.0, the rivalry was simple. The Soviet Union was the one opponent on every front: nuclear, economic, ideological. But in Cold War 2.0, those tensions didn't just go away. They splintered. And suddenly, there were a bunch of new rivals to deal with in each of those areas.
And that is the real danger. When we think we've won, we lose our humility. We get arrogant, we stop looking for our own weaknesses, and we start focusing way too much on ourselves instead of our bigger purpose. We stop adapting, and that's exactly when we become vulnerable to the next players who are always entering the game.
So this brings it all right back to you. Just take a second and think about your work, your career, your life. Who are the other players out there whose strengths maybe make you a little uncomfortable? Who has skills that you admire, even if you don't really like them? Those are your potential worthy rivals.
And that leaves us with this one last, pretty powerful thought. The real goal in business, in politics, in life, isn't to win, because these are all infinite games that have no finish line. The true goal is to play with a mindset that lets you stay in the game for as long as possible, always getting better and always advancing your cause. And a worthy rival? They aren't an obstacle on that path, they are the path. All right, let's talk about a really powerful, and let's be honest, kind of scary idea. It's something that separates the true visionaries from, well, everyone else. We're talking about the choice to blow up your own success on purpose. So picture this. It's 1952. Walt Disney is, he's on top of the world. His company, Walt Disney Productions, is an absolute global sensation, just cranking out hit after hit. So what does he do? He starts selling everything. He's borrowing against his life insurance, cashing out his assets. To anybody looking in from the outside, it looked like the man was completely losing his mind.
And that's the big question here, right? Why would somebody who has already won the game just decide to flip the entire board over and start a new one from scratch? It seems totally irrational. But here's the thing. It's not madness. It's actually a profound and very powerful strategic concept.
What Disney was showing the world has a name. It's called Existential Flexibility. And it is a courageous choice that very, very few leaders ever make. So let's break down exactly what it means.
Okay, so here's the most important part to get. An existential flex is a massive, radical disruption that you start yourself. It's not a reaction to some crisis, it's a proactive, offensive move. And it's all done in service of something much bigger than just profit, what we call a just cause. That's the core purpose, the vision, the whole reason the organization even exists.
Now, it's super important to understand this is not the same thing as the defensive pivot. A pivot is what a company does when its back is against the wall and it's forced to change just to survive. Think about newspapers scrambling to go digital. That's reactive. It's driven by fear. An existential flex, on the other hand, is all offense. It's driven by a vision for a better future. It doesn't just save the company, it totally reignites its soul.
To really get our heads around this, let's dive into the stories of some visionaries who actually had the guts to do it. And we've got to start with Walt Disney and get to the why behind that seemingly crazy decision he made.
You see, Disney's just cause wasn't just making cartoons. No, it went way deeper than that. It was born from his own life. As a little boy on a farm in Missouri, he experienced what his brother Roy called just heaven. But then the farm failed, the family had to move to Kansas City, and life got really, really hard. Drawing became his escape. His entire career, everything he did, was about trying to recreate that feeling of heaven for other people, a perfect, idyllic escape from the grind of the real world.
By the 1950s, Disney felt his own movie studio just couldn't do that anymore. With all the pressure to go public, the growing bureaucracy, it had become too rigid, too finite. It was losing its magic. So he quit his own company to build something that could be a true, living, breathing escape, a place that he called Disneyland. And this quote from Walt himself, man, it just says it all. Think about it. A movie is done once it's released. It's finished. But Disneyland? He saw it as a living thing, something that could grow and change and evolve forever and ever. It was the ultimate expression of his infinite vision and a much better way to advance his just cause than the movie studio had become.
And look, this wasn't just a Walt Disney thing. This pattern of visionary leadership pops up again and again. Let's fast forward a few decades and look at another little company you might have heard of, Apple, and its founder, Steve Jobs.
So, Apple's just cause was basically born out of the counterculture of the 1970s. Jobs and Wozniak saw the personal computer as a tool for the individual, right? A way to empower regular people to stand up against these big, impersonal institutions. Their cause, at its heart, was all about empowerment.
Okay, so it's 1979, and Apple is already a huge success. But then Jobs visits Xerox PARC and sees a brand new technology, the graphical user interface. You know, the mouse, icons, the desktop we all use today. He immediately realized this was the thing that could truly put the power of computing into everyone's hands. It could advance their cause like nothing else. When one of his own executives warned him that chasing this new idea would mean blowing up the company's current multi-million-dollar projects, Jobs' reply was legendary. He just said, better we should blow it up than someone else. That right there, that is the very definition of an existential flex.
But what happens when a company gets to that same crossroads and fails to make the choice? Well, the story of Kodak is just a chilling cautionary tale about the incredible price of what you might call existential inflexibility.
You have to remember, Kodak started with such a noble and powerful just cause. Its founder, George Eastman, wanted to take photography, which was this super complex and expensive process, and make it accessible to everybody. Their motto was brilliant. You press the button, we do the rest. And for 100 years, they absolutely dominated the world.
And here's where the story just becomes tragic. The irony is just staggering. In 1975, it was a Kodak engineer who invented the world's first digital camera. They literally invented the future. They had this massive head start. And yet, by 2012, the company was bankrupt. So what on earth happened?
Well, Kodak's management saw this world-changing invention not as a new way to advance their cause of making photography accessible, but as a direct threat to their existing business. See, Kodak made a fortune, selling film and processing chemicals and photographic paper. Digital photography would make all of that obsolete. Their thinking had become totally finite, totally trapped.
And listen to this, from the inventor himself, Steven Sasson. He explained the problem perfectly. The leaders were so focused on protecting their current golden goose that they couldn't see the future. Sasson said they just couldn't get excited about a future that was maybe 15 or 20 years away, a time when they wouldn't even be at the company anymore. It was short-term thinking at its absolute most destructive.
And the cost of that failure? It was devastating. At its peak, Kodak employed 120,000 people. By the time it declared bankruptcy, that number had cratered by over 95%. This wasn't some market shift that killed Kodak, it was suicide. They refused to make the existential flex, and they paid the ultimate price for it.
So this brings us right to the core lesson, the main takeaway. Every single organization, sooner or later, will face a moment that demands this kind of radical choice. And really, it's simple. You either flex or you fail.
It all boils down to two totally different mindsets. On one side, you have the infinite-minded leaders like Disney and Jobs. Their focus is always on advancing their just cause. They see disruption as a huge opportunity, and they're driven by vision. And on the other side, you've got the finite-minded, like the management at Kodak. They're focused on protecting the current business. They see disruption as a threat, and they are driven by the fear of loss.
So, what do we need to remember from all this? First, an existential flex is a bold, offensive move that serves a purpose bigger than yourself. It's not just chasing the next shiny object. For the infinite-minded leaders, the real risk isn't making the change. The real risk is failing to make the change. And believe me, sooner or later, every single organization arrives at a crossroads where this choice becomes absolutely unavoidable.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. It's easy to look at these giant companies, but this idea applies to all of us, in our own careers and organizations. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. What is the core purpose, the just cause that drives you? And maybe more importantly, what brave, disruptive flex might that cause be demanding of you right now?
Let me ask you something. What if you had to make a choice that was absolutely the right thing to do for your mission, but you knew for a fact it would cost you billions of dollars right now? What would you do? Well, it's not a hypothetical. One company had to answer that very question, and their choice, it changed everything.
For years, this one major company, whose entire mission was helping people on their path to better health, was just haunted by this one simple question. In every meeting with hospitals, with doctors, it was the elephant in the room. How could you be a health company that also sells the #1 preventable cause of death in America? It was this huge, glaring contradiction.
And then, in February 2014, they decided to do something about it. And get this, there was no public pressure, no online campaign yelling at them, no scandal. They just chose to make a change, knowing full well it was going to come with a massive price tag. And that price tag? A jaw-dropping $2 billion. That's what CVS figured they would lose in sales every single year by stopping all tobacco sales. $2 billion. Just gone. By choice. So, as you can probably imagine, a lot of people saw this as a completely reckless, multi-billion-dollar gamble. And the reaction from the world of finance? Well, it was swift and it was harsh. You had folks like CNBC's Jim Cramer who were just completely baffled. He basically said, being a good guy is nice and all, but this isn't Oz and it doesn't pay the bills. His whole focus, and really Wall Street's entire focus, was on the immediate numbers. It's a classic short-term, finite mindset. They just saw a $2 billion hole and screamed disaster. But here's the thing. That gamble? It paid off in ways nobody saw coming. First off, overall cigarette sales actually dropped in states where CVS was a big player. So people didn't just go buy their cigarettes somewhere else. And sales of nicotine patches, they went up. Even better, new health-conscious brands that had refused to be on CVS shelves before were now lining up to partner with them. And the results of all this? Total pharmacy sales actually went up. So what about that earnings per share that Jim Cramer was so worried about? Well, yeah, the stock dropped for about a day. A year and a half later, it hit a record high. And over the next 3 years, that gold standard metric, the average earnings per share, shot up by 70%. That short-term pain led to some incredible long-term gain. So what in the world is going on here? How can two groups of really smart people look at the exact same decision and see completely opposite things? One sees a foolish loss, the other sees a logical investment. Well, the source material for this explainer breaks it all down through the idea of two opposing mindsets. Okay, so on one side, you've got the finite mindset. This way of thinking sees business like a football game. There's a clear start, an end, fixed rules, and the whole point is just to win, to beat the competition this quarter or this year. That's where Wall Street lives. But on the other side, you've got the infinite mindset. It sees business as a game that never ends. The goal isn't to win, but just to keep playing, to stay in the game for as long as possible by pushing a cause forward and building real long-term strength. And to operate with that infinite mindset, you need what the source material calls the courage to lead. It really just means being willing to prioritize that long-term vision, that just cause, over the easy, predictable wins of the short-term game. It's about making a decision that feels completely obvious to you, even if it looks crazy and risky to everyone else. In this infinite mindset, it isn't just about what products you sell. Let's take a look at another story to see how this whole thing applies to a company's most important asset, its people. Okay, so this is Doug Parker. He became the CEO of America West Airlines just 10 days before September 11th, 2001. The whole industry was just collapsing. And for him, at first, saving the company was a business problem, right? A numbers game. But then he met a flight attendant named Mary, and she told him what losing her job would actually mean to her. And suddenly, it wasn't about the numbers anymore. It became personal. And that personal mission eventually led him to create the world's largest airline, where he realized the real cause wasn't just about saving jobs, but about creating a place where people actually felt cared for.
And to prove he meant it, he did something incredible. After competitors gave their employees raises, Parker's team at American Airlines was still stuck in lower-paying contracts. So, instead of just waiting it out, he gave his pilots and flight attendants unsolicited, mid-contract raises to match the competition. It was a decision that would cost the company over $900 million.
Sound familiar? The reaction from those finite-minded analysts was pretty much a carbon copy of the CBS situation. They called it a wealth transfer, complaining that shareholders were getting the leftovers. All they could see was the cost, not the investment. And this right here just perfectly shows that disconnect. The day after the announcement, the stock tanked 9%. But just 2 weeks later, it had bounced all the way back. And by the end of the year, it was up over 20%. The market's short-term freakout just couldn't compete with the long-term reality. A company that invests in its people is a stronger company. Period.
Now here's where the story takes a really fun twist. For decades, the most famous long-term investor on the planet, Warren Buffett, absolutely hated airlines. He famously joked that a smart capitalist should have just shot down the Wright brothers to save everyone from the terrible business of airlines. And yet today, guess who the single largest shareholder of American Airlines is? Yep, Warren Buffett. When Parker told Buffett's team about his plan to give out those huge unsolicited raises, they gave him their blessing. The ultimate infinite-minded investor didn't just see a good stock. He saw the long-term value being created by a leader with an infinite-minded philosophy.
But what happens when a company says it has a great purpose, but just doesn't have the courage to actually act on it? Well, this is where you see that huge gap between inspiring words and, well, disappointing actions. So after CVS made its big move, its competitors had to answer the same question. Walgreens, whose stated purpose is to help people lead healthier lives, responded by just reducing space for tobacco. And Rite Aid, which claims a personal interest in your health, gave this legalistic answer about selling products in accordance with laws. I mean, it's so clear. Their actions just did not match their supposed cause. Now, contrast all that corporate speak with this. The day after CVS made its announcement, an employee got a call from her mom, who was nearly in tears, saying how proud she was that her daughter worked for a company like that. That's the kind of loyalty, that deep emotional connection that you just can't buy. You have to earn it with courageous, purpose-driven action. So this all leads us to the biggest question, right? Where does this courage actually come from? I mean, it's easy for us to admire these stories, but how can any of us, in whatever role we're in, actually start to think this way? Well, according to the source material, there are really two paths. The first one is a bit of a gamble. You can just wait for some life-altering moment to smack you in the face and force a new perspective on you, kind of like what happened to Doug Parker. But there's a much more reliable path, and it's a practice. It starts with proactively finding a just cause, a vision of the future so compelling that you'd be willing to sacrifice for it. Then you find trusted partners who believe in that cause as much as you do. And with that foundation, you just commit to advancing that cause day in and day out, especially when it's hard. You know, thinking this way, it really changes how you see everything. And it leaves us with one final question to chew on. Just look at your own workplace, your own leaders, maybe even yourself. Is the game being played just to win, to post good numbers for the next quarter? Or is it being played to last, to advance a cause that will be around long after any single product, person, or quarterly report is gone?